It was one of those evenings that felt heavier than usual, when even the sound of my own footsteps seemed too loud in the silence of my apartment. I remember the dull ache in my shoulders, the kind that comes from carrying too many invisible weights. My bag slipped from my fingers and hit the floor with a soft thud, echoing the exhaustion pulsing through me. I just wanted quiet. A few hours where no one needed me, no one called, no one asked for help. I reached for my phone, forgotten on the hallway table since morning. The screen blinked to life, its glow briefly softening the dim room. Among the usual notifications, bills, work emails, missed calls from Mom, one stood out. A video message from Aunt Susan. That alone was strange enough to make me pause. She never sent videos. In fact, she barely texted at all unless it was to forward some family update. My thumb hovered over the notification. There was no caption, no explanation, just her name and a short clip waiting to be opened. My heartbeat quickened for reasons I couldn't explain. Maybe it was instinct, that quiet voice inside that sometimes warns you right before the ground shifts under your feet. I told myself it was probably something innocent, a family gathering, maybe a message meant for someone else. But a part of me hesitated, sensing something heavier behind the silence. Finally, curiosity overpowered caution. I tapped play. The screen filled with familiar faces. My mother, my father, my brother Ethan, gathered in the living room I'd grown up in. The same room where we'd celebrated birthdays, shared dinners, fought, and made up. It should have felt comforting, but something about their laughter hit me wrong. It wasn't warm. It was sharp. Then I heard it. My name, my mother's voice, light and teasing. "It's almost too easy," she said, and the others laughed. My father leaned in, swirling the drink in his hand. "Our little ATM never disappoints." My stomach dropped, but I couldn't look away. Ethan's laughter joined in, low and careless. "Just say it's an emergency. She'll send money in minutes." My breath caught somewhere between disbelief and nausea. I replayed the words in my head, trying to twist them into something else. A joke, a misunderstanding, anything that didn't mean what it sounded like. But their faces told the truth. They were relaxed, amused, comfortable in their cruelty. This wasn't a slip of the tongue. This was routine. The air in my apartment felt thinner as the video continued. Every favor I'd done for them over the years, every desperate call in the middle of the night, every, "I don't know what we'll do without you," all of it flashed before my eyes in sickening clarity. The pieces rearranged themselves into a pattern I'd been too blind to see. Their love had always come with a price tag. My hands trembled as I held the phone closer, the image blurring through my tears. I could hear Ethan again, his voice echoing through the tiny speaker. "She actually believes we can't manage on our own." More laughter. My own reflection flickered faintly on the dark edges of the screen. Eyes wide, lips parted, disbelief painted across my face. I paused the video but didn't lower the phone. My living room was silent except for the faint hum of the fridge and the quiet ringing in my ears. My heart felt too loud, beating in sharp, uneven bursts. I thought about every sacrifice I'd made, the overtime shifts, the canceled plans, the vacations I never took, and realized they had never once been grateful. The video waited there on the frozen screen. My family caught mid-laugh, their faces twisted with amusement. My thumb hovered over the replay button. Part of me wanted to delete it, to pretend I hadn't seen it, to cling to the version of them I'd spent hours protecting. But another part, the quiet, tired part that had been ignored for too long, whispered that maybe it was time to stop pretending. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw their faces frozen in laughter, their voices echoing through the dark corners of my room. The video had ended hours ago, but it kept replaying in my head, looping over and over like a cruel lullaby. I sat there on the couch, the glow of the phone still faintly illuminating my lap, the battery long since drained, and yet I couldn't let go. Something inside me had cracked, and through that crack, the truth began to pour in. I started remembering moments I had buried years ago. My mother's soft sighs whenever I said I was tired. Oh, poor you. You think you have it hard? Try raising 3 kids with nothing. My father's lectures at family dinners, always loud enough for everyone to hear. Maybe if you weren't so emotional, you'd be more successful. And Ethan's constant chaos, the accidents, the emergencies, the I just need a little help this one time. Back then, I thought they were flawed, human, struggling like everyone else. But now, I saw it for what it was, a performance, and I'd been the audience paying for the tickets. The realization stung in ways I didn't know were possible. My mother's guilt trips weren't acts of love. They were chains, carefully crafted to keep me obedient. Every "you owe us" and "family comes first" had been a command disguised as affection. My father's sharp words, the ones that made me feel small even when I was trying my best, weren't about teaching lessons. They were about control, about keeping me in my place. And my brother, I used to think he was just lost, a little reckless, needing guidance. I see now how clever he really was, how he knew exactly when to play the victim, when to cry, when to beg. Every so-called crisis was timed perfectly, right before his bills were due, right when I was starting to save for myself. He had learned from the best. They all had. Manipulation was their family language, and I'd been fluent without realizing it. I remember staring at the empty space on the wall where a family photo used to hang. We'd taken it during a Christmas years ago, me standing between my parents, a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. I'd always told myself that was just how families were. A little tension, a few misunderstandings. But now, even that photo felt like evidence. A frozen lie, pretending to be love. My body felt heavy, like every muscle was filled with regret. I thought about all the times I'd defended them, to friends, to coworkers, even to myself. I'd said things like, "They mean well," or "They're just under pressure," or "Family is complicated." I didn't realize that what I was really saying was, "They hurt me, but I'll let them." Hours slipped by, but I didn't notice. The house was silent, but my thoughts were screaming. It was as if my entire life had been flipped upside down, and now I was staring at the underbelly of every memory. Ugly, raw, and real. The love I'd clung to had been conditional. The care I'd given had been consumed. And the person I'd become, the one who always said yes, who always gave more, who always forgave, was the result of years of quiet manipulation. I started to write things down, small details, phrases, patterns, the times they'd made me feel guilty for saying no, the moments they'd twisted my kindness into obligation. As the list grew, I realized something chilling. They had taught me to see love as something I had to earn. That was their power over me. They made me believe I was lucky to be needed. I looked around my apartment, at the walls that had once felt too empty, too quiet. Now, that quiet felt sacred. It was mine. No one yelling, no one asking, no one taking. For the first time in my life, I sat in silence and felt what it was like to not owe anyone anything. And in that stillness, I realized the truth wasn't what broke me. It was what finally set me free. The morning after that sleepless night, I stared at my phone, its screen lighting up with familiar names. Mom, Dad, Ethan. Dozens of missed calls, unread messages piling up like ghosts waiting at my doorstep. I watched them flash one after another and felt nothing. The panic, the guilt, the instinct to pick up and apologize, it wasn't there anymore. Something inside me had gone quiet, and in that quiet, I found clarity. I didn't answer a single call that day. Not one. Every ring felt like a test, a pullback into the same cycle I'd lived for years, so I let it ring. I sat still, my hands trembling at first, but then slowly, steadying. It felt strange, almost unnatural to put myself first, to not rush to fix their latest emergency. But the silence that followed was louder than their demands had ever been, and far more peaceful. Then came the texts. Long paragraphs filled with emotional traps. "We're so worried about you. Don't ignore your family. After all we've done for you." The guilt was sharp, but this time I didn't let it sink in. I read every word with new eyes and saw the pattern clearly. Every sentence ended with something they wanted: money, attention, obedience. None of it was love. It was control dressed up as concern. So I made a decision. If they wanted to play games, I would play smarter. I opened my laptop and started gathering everything. Years of bank transfers, messages asking for help, forged signatures on loan documents I never agreed to. I'd ignored these red flags before because I didn't want to believe what they meant. But now, each file, each screenshot felt like armor. Solid proof that I hadn't been crazy all this time. As the digital folders filled up, I began to see a timeline of manipulation. Every favor lined up with their lies. Every crisis with my bank balance dropping. It was horrifying to witness it all in one place. But also empowering. Because now I wasn't their victim. I was their witness. I started documenting everything from that day forward. Every call I didn't answer, every voicemail I saved, every emotional text I screenshotted. My notes app became a vault of truth, a quiet rebellion that no one could see. It was my way of reclaiming power, not by shouting or fighting, but by preparing. Of course, they noticed. The silence didn't sit well with them. The messages got colder, sharper. "You've changed. You think you're better than us now. We just needed a little help." When guilt didn't work, they switched to anger. When anger didn't work, they turned to shame. But none of it pierced me the way it used to. I'd learned their tricks, and once you see manipulation for what it is, it loses its magic. Some days were harder than others. I'd catch myself typing a reply, wanting to explain, wanting them to understand why I was pulling away. But then I'd remember. Explanations never worked before. They never wanted understanding. They wanted access. So instead, I'd delete the message and walk away from my phone, breathing through the ache in my chest until it passed. Every boundary I built felt like a small victory. Saying no, blocking a number, ignoring a voicemail. These things sound simple, but when you've spent your whole life being conditioned to say yes, they feel like acts of war. I wasn't just refusing their requests. I was dismantling years of emotional conditioning. They called me cold, ungrateful, heartless. The words stung, not because I believed them, but because I'd heard them so many times before. It was their way of punishing me for growing a spine. But this time, their voices didn't echo the same way inside me. I had finally stopped trying to be the version of myself that they could use, and started becoming the version that could survive without them. It happened on a gray Thursday afternoon, the kind of day that feels ordinary until it suddenly isn't. Ethan had texted me, insisting we talk things out. His words were coated in fake warmth, the kind that used to make me cave. I hesitated, but something in me said go. Not for him. For closure. For myself. So I agreed to meet at a small cafe downtown, a place we used to go when things between us still felt like family. When I arrived, he was already there, leaning back in his chair, his phone on the table, confidence painted all over his face. He smiled when he saw me, that same smug grin that had gotten him out of trouble 100 times before. But I didn't smile back. I sat across from him, my bag close to me, my guard even closer. The moment I met his eyes, I knew this wasn't going to be a conversation. It was going to be a performance. He started right away, voice loud enough for the people around us to hear. "You've been acting really strange lately," he said. "Mom's worried sick. Dad too. You've just shut everyone out. You think that's fair?" His tone dripped with fake concern, but I recognized it now for what it was. Manipulation, polished and practiced. When I didn't respond, he leaned forward, smirking. "You know," he said, "everyone's talking. They think you've gotten a bit selfish, maybe even greedy. All that money, all that attitude, it's changed you." I could feel the eyes of strangers flicker toward us, their curiosity feeding his ego. He was trying to make me look like the villain, the ungrateful sister who'd turned her back on her family. My heart pounded, but I didn't flinch. For years, I'd let moments like this define me, made myself smaller just to keep the peace. But that day, something inside me shifted. I straightened my back, placed my hands calmly on the table, and met his gaze with a steadiness I didn't know I had. "You mean," I said, my voice steady but sharp, "how I'm refusing to be your personal ATM?" The words sliced through the air like a blade. The cafe went silent. The hum of conversation stopped. Spoons froze mid-stir. Ethan's smirk fell away in an instant. His face turned pale, his mouth opening and closing like he was searching for a script that no longer worked. For the first time, he wasn't in control of the scene. A few people at nearby tables exchanged looks, some whispering under their breath. I didn't care what they thought. What mattered was that the truth was finally out, and he couldn't twist it anymore. The power he'd held over me for years evaporated under the weight of a single sentence spoken too loudly for him to bury. Ethan tried to recover, mumbling something about misunderstandings, but his voice cracked. His confidence had fled, and in its place stood a man who suddenly looked very small. I watched him squirm, his fingers tightening around his coffee cup, his jaw twitching with frustration. I realized, in that moment, that this was the version of him they'd all protected. Fragile, angry, afraid of being exposed. My hands stopped shaking. The fear that used to paralyze me when they cornered me was gone. All I felt was a strange calm, the kind that comes when you've already lost everything and have nothing left to fear. For the first time, I saw the dynamic for what it truly was. I had never been powerless. I had just been too loyal to use my power. When I stood up to leave, he didn't stop me. He couldn't. The look in his eyes told me he finally understood. The old version of me, the one who'd always fix, fund, and forgive, was gone. What sat across from him in that cafe wasn't his sister, the ATM. It was the woman who had finally learned the price of her silence and refused to pay it any longer. The day I decided to expose them didn't come from rage. It came from exhaustion. I was tired of carrying their secrets like they were my own. Tired of pretending I came from a family that cared. Tired of living in a lie that I hadn't even built. So I did something they never expected. I rented a hall. Not a fancy one, just a clean, quiet space downtown with good lighting and enough chairs for everyone who needed to see the truth. It wasn't revenge I wanted. It was clarity. The invitations were simple. No dramatic language, no explanation, just a short message. There's something I need to share. Please come. I sent them to family, neighbors, and family friends, all the people who'd watched my parents and brother play their perfect family act for years. People who thought my silence meant guilt. People who believed their stories about the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family. When the day came, my hands shook as I set up the projector. I arrived early, heart pounding so loud it felt like it echoed in the empty hall. One by one, people began to trickle in, smiling politely, whispering among themselves. Then my parents walked in, dressed as if they were attending a wedding instead of a reckoning. My father's face was calm, but his eyes were sharp, scanning the room like a man assessing a threat. My mother clung to my brother's arm, feigning worry, her voice dripping with forced sweetness as she said, "We're so glad you called this meeting, honey. Maybe we can finally clear the air." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood near the front, laptop open, projector humming softly. The air in the room felt heavy, like everyone could sense that something big was about to happen. When the last person took their seat, I pressed play. The first clip was the video, the one Aunt Susan had sent me. The room filled with the sound of laughter, the cruel kind that still made my stomach twist. My parents' voices echoed through the speakers, crystal clear. "She'll send it," my mother said. "She always does." Then my brother's voice, smug, confident. "Yeah, our little ATM never says no." The audience went silent. The sound of their betrayal filled every corner of the hall. I didn't speak. I didn't explain. I just let the evidence play. The forged documents appeared next. The signatures that weren't mine. The transactions that drained my accounts. I showed screenshots of text messages, bank transfers, every emergency that had been nothing more than a scam disguised as family need. Each image landed like a blow, and with every new slide, I could feel their empire crumbling. My parents sat in the front row, frozen. My mother's hand clutched her pearls like she could hold her dignity together if she just gripped tightly enough. My father's jaw twitched, his composure slipping with every piece of proof. Ethan's face turned pale. His hands fidgeted in his lap. The performance was over, and for the first time, they didn't have a script. The whispers started then, soft at first, then louder. Old friends exchanged glances, neighbors murmured. People who'd once defended them now looked at them like strangers. I saw years of their lies unravel in real time. All those carefully crafted images of respectability, the reputation they guarded like gold, dissolving under the weight of the truth they thought I'd never dare to speak. I looked out at the faces in the room, the shock, the disbelief, the pity. But I didn't feel ashamed anymore. I felt free. For years they told everyone I was dramatic, unstable, ungrateful. Now, every word, every receipt, every recording proved otherwise. I didn't have to scream or accuse. The truth did the work for me. When the final clip ended, I closed my laptop. The room was dead silent. I could feel my parents' eyes burning into me, a mix of fury and fear. But I didn't look at them. I didn't need to. I had already won the moment I stopped hiding what they had done. Their kingdom of control, built on guilt, shame, and manipulation, had finally turned to dust, and all I had to do was show the world what it was made of. I never expected the video to spread beyond that hall. I uploaded it quietly, almost mechanically, just to have a record of what had happened. A digital footprint of the truth they'd tried to erase. I didn't even think people would watch it. But by the next morning, my phone was vibrating nonstop. Notifications, messages, shares. The video had been posted, reposted, and re-uploaded across every platform. Thousands of people had seen it, and the number kept climbing. At first, I was terrified. My story, my pain, was out there in the hands of strangers. But then, as I read the comments, something shifted. People weren't mocking me or questioning me. They were thanking me. Strangers wrote things like, "This is my life too," and "You just told my story." One message read, "You gave words to the pain I've been living in silence." And I realized that what had started as my family's shame had become something much bigger, a reflection of how many others were quietly suffering under the weight of family loyalty. Within days, journalists started calling. They wanted to interview me to understand how I'd gathered the evidence, how I'd found the courage to speak. I didn't think of myself as brave. I just told them the truth, that I was tired of being treated like a resource instead of a person. I didn't give them drama or tears. I just spoke calmly, because I had already lived the storm. The calm was my victory. Meanwhile, my parents panicked. Their phones, which had once been filled with praise and invitations, now buzzed with silence. People who used to look up to them stopped calling. Their colleagues avoided them. The perfect family image they'd built for decades was gone, replaced by the truth. Cold, public, undeniable. They tried to fight it the only way they knew how, with lies. My father gave a statement to a local newspaper, claiming the video had been edited maliciously. My mother posted online about forgiveness and misunderstandings, trying to paint herself as a victim of a daughter who'd turned against her family. But it didn't work. The evidence was too detailed, too precise, too real. Every attempt they made to twist the story only made them look more desperate. Ethan, of course, disappeared, deleted his social media, changed his number, cut ties with everyone who knew him. I heard rumors that he'd moved to another city, trying to start over under a cloud of embarrassment. I didn't follow up. For once, his problems weren't my responsibility to fix. The silence that followed his absence felt like the cleanest air I'd breathed in years. What surprised me most was the number of people who reached out privately. Men and women from all walks of life, doctors, students, parents, even elderly people, confessing how their own families had manipulated them, used them, drained them. I spent nights reading their messages, realizing I wasn't the only one who had loved people who didn't know how to love back. My story had become a mirror, reflecting pain people didn't know how to voice until they saw mine. I watched as my video got shared on forums, podcasts, reaction channels. People debated it, analyzed it, empathized with it. Some were angry for me, others saw it as a warning, a lesson about boundaries, about how blind love can be turned into control. And though part of me felt exposed, another part felt healed. Becky, lost for the first time, my pain wasn't hidden, and it wasn't wasted. My parents' community, the same one that once praised their charity work and good reputation, began to see them differently. Neighbors who used to greet them with smiles now crossed the street to avoid them. Invitations stopped coming. Their names became whispers instead of applause. It wasn't revenge I felt watching it unfold. It was balance. The truth had finally evened the scales. And through it all, I stayed silent. I didn't argue online, didn't release another statement, didn't feed the fire. I let the truth stand on its own, because I didn't need to defend myself anymore. The world had already seen what I'd lived through, and for once, it believed me. These days, my mornings look nothing like they used to. I wake up to sunlight spilling through the curtains, not to a dozen missed calls or messages demanding money or guilt-laced favors. The silence that once felt so lonely now feels sacred. It's the sound of peace, of boundaries finally respected, of a life that belongs only to me. My phone sits quietly on the nightstand, no longer a tool of control. For the first time in years, I wake up without dread, without anxiety over who might need something next. There's a calmness to my routine now. I make coffee slowly, savoring the smell, the warmth of the cup against my hands. I used to rush through mornings, always on edge, waiting for the next emotional crisis. Now, I take my time. I've learned to find beauty in the stillness, in the way the light hits the walls, in the sound of my own breath. This peace didn't come easily. It was earned piece by piece through every sleepless night, every boundary I had to fight to keep. Sometimes, I think about the version of me who existed before all of this, the one who tried so desperately to be everything to everyone. I wish I could hug her. She didn't know that love shouldn't cost you your peace. She didn't know that loyalty without respect is just submission. She gave until there was nothing left and still believed she wasn't doing enough. I don't hate her. I thank her, because she walked through the fire so I could live in the calm. My apartment has become my sanctuary. Every piece of furniture, every framed picture, every candle I light feels intentional, chosen for me, not for anyone else's approval. The walls that used to echo with silence now hold laughter, music, and the sound of my children's joy. We're not rich, but we're free. And that kind of peace, I've learned, is worth more than anything money can buy. I started journaling again, something I hadn't done since I was a teenager. At first, it was just a way to untangle my thoughts, to make sense of everything I'd been through. But over time, it became something more. My journal turned into a roadmap of healing, each entry a reminder that pain can be transformed if you're brave enough to face it. Writing helped me see that revenge doesn't always mean destruction. Sometimes, the most powerful revenge is rebuilding yourself so completely that your past can no longer touch you. Eventually, I began sharing pieces of my story online. Not the scandal, not the details, but the lessons. I talked about financial abuse, emotional guilt, and what it means to break free from manipulative families. I didn't expect anyone to listen, but they did. People wrote to me, telling me that my story gave them courage to set boundaries, to say no, to walk away from toxic relationships. And somewhere along the way, I realized that my pain had turned into purpose. I began volunteering with organizations that help victims of family exploitation. People who've been drained emotionally or financially by those they trusted most. Sitting across from them, hearing their stories, I see reflections of my own past. The trembling voices, the confusion, the guilt. I know it all too well. And when I tell them, you can walk away, I mean it. Because I did. That's when I understood. Survival isn't enough. Healing means turning your scars into strength that helps others find their way out too. There are still moments when old habits try to resurface, when I feel that familiar tug of guilt, the urge to fix, to please. But now, I pause and remind myself, I don't owe anyone my peace. I don't owe explanations for my boundaries. I've learned that saying no is not cruelty, it's self-respect. And each time I choose myself over their manipulation, I reclaim another piece of the life they tried to take from me. My parents' names still come up sometimes, in articles, in whispers, in distant conversations. I don't react. Their story belongs to the past now. I no longer feel anger when I think of them, just distance. The kind that comes from finally understanding that not everyone who raised you is capable of loving you the way you deserve. Forgiveness isn't something I owe them. It's something I give myself, quietly, by refusing to carry their mistakes any longer. Now, when I look in the mirror, I barely recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes don't hold the same fear they once did. Her smile isn't forced, it's soft, real. She's not a victim, not a provider, not a pawn in anyone's story. She's simply herself, unbothered, unafraid, and finally free.